review of what SRP's rates are and just when's on peak and when's off peak throughout the specific time of year. Is that okay with everybody?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So you all should be able to see my screen now on SRP's website, right?
Yeah.
Yep.
For the most part, most of you should be on this customer generation plan. I believe there's one or two of you that are on this average demand plan. But most of you are on this plan here. So during the winter months, we're already into May, but just a real quick recap of November to April, on peak is from 5 to 9 in the morning and 5 to 9 at night. And the rate per kilowatt hour is just super cheap on those, because if you buy it from SRP in the winter, it's going to be 4 cents or less per kilowatt hour. And then when we talk about the demand charge, the demand will only come into play during those months during either 5 to 9 in the morning and 5 to 9 at night, only during weekdays. So Saturday and Sunday are just off peak all day long. And then in the summertime, the on peak hours change from 2 o'clock to 8 o'clock. So from now until October. And the price of the electricity in kilowatt hours from SRP is really, really cheap. So this 3.6 cents is pretty much less than wholesale price. And I've yet to find a utility that will offer this low of a rate. So the price of power in the summer months and in the winter, but is really cheap per kilowatt hour, whether you buy it when you buy it from SRP. Now, on-peak kilowatt hours aren't very expensive either. So most of you, the average price per kilowatt hour before solar was roughly about 11 cents, depending on what rate plan you were on. So now in kilowatt hours, anything you buy from them, most of that power that you buy from SRP is going to come at this 3.6 cent rate, because most of your power throughout the year will be bought during these 4 months, or during July and August at this 4 cents a kilowatt hour. You're not going to buy a lot of power in the winter from them, but if you do, it's going to be at that either 4.1 or 3.7 cents.
Okay.
Then on the demand charge, it's different for each time of the year as well. So from November to April, the first 3 kilowatts is $3.50 a kilowatt. So that basically only costs $10. And then for the next 7, it's $5.50. So if you had a demand of 5 in the winter, it'd be 3 times $3.50 and 2 times $5.50. So about $21 if you had that high of a demand in the winter months. If you have a gas furnace and water heater, it should always be less, 3 kilowatts or less during the winter time. If you have a electric water heater and electric furnace, it'll probably be closer to that 5 kilowatt during that time. During the summer months, you can see the price per kilowatt goes up. And so the months that we care about the solar producing is really during this time here. So with most of you, I probably told you the phrase of when the panels are producing is a little bit more important than how much they produce. Because the more you produce in the afternoon from May to October, it'll help minimize the demand charge, as well as the demand management system from Inergy, which is really what this call is all about, right?
Yes.
Right. Jordan, can I just interject?
Yep, go ahead, Peter.
One interesting point I learned talking to the agent at SRP last week was looking at the E27 PDF. It was showing the demand charge rate on the page, but the only thing that indicated that it was the demand charge and not the usage is that it was quoting per kilowatt for the demand charge,
right,
and usage is quoted in kilowatt hour. Okay, and I was glad to make note of that, and she said, oh man, that should be on the page. I don't know if they're going to fix it, but while we were talking about it, I thought I'd just point that out.
Yeah, so you can see, it should be on right here, it says per kW. So So that stands for kilowatt, where up here on the price for electricity is measured in kWh, which is kilowatt hours. So the demand, as they explain it on their site, right here, it's based on a 30-minute interval during on-peak hours only, when your home used the maximum peak amount of electricity measured in, you can say measured in watts or measured in kilowatts, because 1,000 watts is a kilowatt. So, for example, most AC units are 4,500 watts or 4.5 kilowatts. A typical dryer is about 5,000 watts or 5 kilowatts. So the energy demand management system is connected to just the major appliances only, which would be an AC unit or 2 AC units if you have 2, a dryer, and a water heater. Those are the major appliances that have a higher breaker size, and the breaker is about 30 amps to 40 amps. So the idea of the solar is when the solar is up and running during this time, the load controller is really not going to come into play until the sun starts to set, which right now during the summertime is going to be roughly around that 6:30 to 8 o'clock window. That's when the sun starts to go down and your solar is going to start producing less. And essentially that's the only reason for the load controller, is when the solar is not working, to make sure you don't have a big spike in your consumption. So if you can, it'd be a good idea if you can to log into your own energy account while I show you mine at my house. If you can. So this is my home here, that I'm just kind of give you an idea. And then I'm going to show you my SRP bill to kind of help you understand, okay, how do I look at the actual bill when it comes? What should I look for? And stuff like that. So I think, Brett, you emailed me some questions. Let me see if I can find those first to answer those.
Yeah, and I can put some in the chat too if that's helpful, or if you want to
Yeah,
put
that'd
them
be
up on
great.
your email. Okay.
Yeah, I can't find your initial questions. I saw that.
Yeah, so the first kind of basic question is how to read and interpret the monthly details on demand and usage. And I would say probably the daily ones as well, just the basic dashboard, how it works.
Water heater and dryer tied together
So
from the monitoring.
There's a lot of different screens in here are on the phone app. We're trying to figure out which one is comparable to what you're looking at right now.
Does the phone app even have this?
Yeah,
We don't.
on
We
the
don't see
phone,
one.
it's going to show you these numbers like individually as you scroll down. So like when you first log in, you might see a number with a KW in front of it.
No. This is month to date, 72-hour distribution. Probably the usage or the energy screen on the mobile app might be the closest.
I'm not as familiar with their app. I don't really use their app as much as I do the computer.
Oh,
Anyway, you can log in from a. It should have the same numbers here that like for usage on peak or usage off peak.
Oh, that might be under the energy tab on the iPhone app. Under energy, it seems to have demand and usage, month-to-date demand, month-to-date usage.
Yeah.
Yeah, you'll have on the phone, because it's so much smaller, you'll have you won't have as many numbers on one screen as you see on my screen.
Over here.
Over there. That's kind of what ours looks like on the phone. Oh, is that maybe even not showing that? So it does, it's not the same graph, but it's got the numbers down below.
Right, it's got the usage numbers on the energy screen, and then costing is on a separate screen.
On the computer, you can kind of just see that on your month to date. So this is the major, this is really the most probably the most important tab to look at is this month to date. It'll project what you've used, what you've generated, and what your cost will look like on a projected basis. So for example, you can see my peak demand was on May 5th, and it gives me the exact time of when it was at 1900, so 7 o'clock, which for most of us, your peak demand is going to be between that 7 to 8 o'clock window, because the sun, at least for during summer hours, because the sun is starting to set, and it's going to be that half-hour window of basically when the panels aren't producing. And for the month of May, my peak demand is set at 5 kilowatts, which I'll show you how to set that in a second here for your individual homes. And it says here, my cost for that demand charge is 50 bucks. So this right here, this peak demand is this cost right there. Now, my peak demand off peak is crazy high, but there's no cost associated with this number here. So if they took that number off, it wouldn't matter. But it's more so just to show, hey, this is what it could be if you run all your appliances all at the same time. Now, my car is electric, so this is including charging my car at nighttime and running 2 air conditioners and running the dryer probably for a half-hour window. So during off-peak hours, you can run as many appliances all together at the same time, and it's not going to be a cost associated with it. Now, what the load controller will do is, if the sun is down and the AC is running, and if you accidentally turn your dryer on, you're gonna, the load controller is gonna see that you're on a trajectory of surpassing your demand peak that you set it at, and then it would shut power to the dryer. That's what its function is supposed to do, is to basically make it so that if you're about to hit your peak demand, that it will shut power off so that you don't. So it's kind of a smart system in the sense that it projects what you're going to use within a half-hour window. So if you ran the dryer for 20 minutes, you'd have no peak demand problem because it's only measured in half-hour windows. And so essentially it's for a whole half hour, how much power you got from the grid, but measured in kW, not kilowatt hours. Now this usage over here, or any questions on that real quick?
Well, I don't know if this is the right time for it, but I'll ask. In peak demand time on our system, the only thing we had running was the air conditioning and of course the water heater, which might not have actually been heating at the moment. And we have an electric stove, and we turned it on to cook dinner, the oven and 1 or 2 burners. And the air conditioner kicked right off.
That's happened a couple times, so I guess they're saying I shouldn't be cooking.
Oven? Yeah.
So the load controller has no effect on the oven itself. But if the water heater was on and the AC was running and you were cooking dinner, then that's probably why it kicked on. But the AC shouldn't shut off last. So we can look at, maybe I can log into your account after and look at the priorities, because the AC should be a higher priority than like your water heater.
Right. Well, we don't really know whether the water heater turned on or off, because that's not something that, we can hear inside the house.
The AC is a 1.
The AC says 1, so that means that's top priority. So that should kick off last.
Right. 2 is water heater and 3 is dryer.
Like at my own home, I have a gas water heater, so mine's only connected to the dryer and the 2 air conditioners. So we just don't run the dryer between those hours. And if we had if both ACs were running at the same time, it would shut power to one and let the other one run, and then kind of toggle back and forth. So when it shuts off the AC, it should only be for a small window. If you were to, like, say, for example, you ran the oven for 15 minutes and then turn it off, the AC should kick back on automatically.
Yeah, it does a few minutes later. We were just wondering, we know the load controller doesn't have anything to do with shutting the oven on and off, but I was asking, does it use enough electricity that that adding the air conditioner makes it turn off?
So it might, you might have not hit your peak demand, but it just depends on what other appliances were on. So like a light bulb's like 100 watts. So 10 light bulbs is 1 kilowatt. And the oven itself, I think, is 3 kilowatts. And if your AC is 5 kilowatts, so running the AC and the oven collectively will then temporarily probably shut power to your AC unit if you're, depending on what your peak demand is set at. I think we set it at 5 or maybe 6 for your home, right?
Well, originally it was 4, so I raised it to 5, and now for May I have it at 5.5, and
Okay.
then June I have it at 6.
Sorry,
3.
So real quick, since we're on that subject, before I move on though, Peter, you had a question?
I was just going to ask about the priorities, because the wording on the app really makes it sound like the priority is upside down. And I was trying to pull it up on the web page, which is where it also says the same thing, but it says the basic rule of thumb is that the loads with lower priorities will have more opportunity to run. Okay, so that makes it sound like the AC that you want to run most, you want the AC to have the most opportunity to run.
Right.
This wording, both on the webpage and on the app, suggests that the AC should have the lowest priority, like the lowest priority to be shed.
I'll have to ask Steve, the owner, because the way they've explained it to us is priority 1. So you can see on my screen here where it says priority.
Yes.
So the dryer is priority 3, which means that should be shut off first before the air conditioners would be shut off in that order.
Right.
But you're saying the way it's worded is opposite.
Yeah, go into that paragraph on your screen there.
Okay.
And read it carefully. Priorities. The basic rule of thumb. Below the cursor now.
Code with a priority 0 does not participate in the demand control process and can be used anytime.
Keep going, keep going.
Basic rule of thumb.
It's after the bold.
Basic rule of thumb.
Basic
There.
rule of thumb. Oh, here, okay.
Lower priorities have more opportunity to run.
We have a high and low priority run. For example, it is usual.
Low, the word low instead of a high priority item. A high priority item is number 1, whereas the number 1 doesn't sound like a high. Yeah, I get what he's talking about. It's semantics. Yeah.
Yeah, lower meaning maybe a lower number, meaning 1 is lower than 2. I'll have to double check with Steve to make sure that that's the case, because
Whatever it is, it's very confusing and ambiguous,
Right.
the way it's explained. And I haven't had a chance to actually see one thing get shed and not the other to see which one is really being shed. So I haven't been able to confirm it, but that wording, both there and on the iPhone app, really needs to be clarified.
So we had, my wife accidentally ran the dryer during on peak, and the dryer was shut off at our house while the AC kept running. So I would assume then that is set up correctly, and that the priority 3 is not as important as priority 1. But that'll be my homework, Peter, to confirm that the lower priority, meaning
the lower number, like 1 is a lower number than 4.
right, 1 is lower than 2 and 2 is lower than 3. So a lower number, even though it's a higher priority, but a lower number.
And then if they can give that example, like the AC with a priority of 1 is a lower priority number than the dryer of 4. Man, but that just needs to be cleared up, okay?
Yeah, because it's technically this number 1 is a higher priority, meaning more important, but it's a lower number, I would imagine. It is a little word confusing. I'll confirm that with Steve.
So 0 would be less than 1. So that's even that's the highest priority. 0.
Right. So if it has a 0, if we put 0 priority, like right here, it says a load with a priority 0 does not participate in load control process.
Ah, got it. Okay.
Any time. So if I put 0 on this air conditioner, then the load controller would never shut power to that air conditioner.
Okay.
So if you don't ever want the AC shut off at all, technically you could put a 0 there and it would never shut off the AC.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm understanding how you were describing it now. And the complication is that we're using numbers, not letters.
Right.
Yeah, okay, good. Well, we can move on from that then. Thank you very much.
So to access your demand profile of what you want to set the demand as, so this is the menu bar up at the top screen, that 3 line right here. And then if you click on devices, and then mine says white, DMS, it'll say your last name, DMS. We use my wife's email, her maiden name's White, so for some reason that says white. And then if you click on demand profile, it's going to pull up the on-peak hours and off-peak hours for every single month. So January, from November to April, there's 2 sets of on-peak hours. So you can have a different peak set for in the evening than you want in the morning. So you could set this at, technically I could set this at 3.5 or 3, and then 5 in the morning or in the evening if I really wanted to. For me, I just have all the winter months set at 4, meaning I just don't ever want my peak demand to go over 4 in the winter. And then May, so for example, my peak demand so far for May has been 5. So that means that I've had some events where it shut power off because it hasn't surpassed 5 yet. And then for me, it's set at 7 from June to September, because when the sun goes down in the summer months, it's still 100+ degrees outside and you're still going to want to run your air conditioner. Now I have 2 air conditioners though. So if you only have 1 air conditioner, you can maybe set that at 6 versus 5. But basically if you don't want it to go past 7, that's what you set your peak demand at. Or if you don't want it to go past 6, that's what you'll set your peak demand at.
Jordan, the fact that April was so hot this year, I think it didn't it mess with some of the settings, or?
It could have, because, you know, for April, mine was set at 4.
Yeah.
In April though, the on-peak hours are still 5 to 9.
Yeah.
So it wasn't very hot at night and it wasn't very hot in the morning. It was hot during the day, which is considered off-peak from 9 o'clock to 5 o'clock. But there could be maybe that 5 to 7 hour window where it's still hot.
Yeah, at night. Yeah.
And your solar wasn't producing. It could come into play there, but essentially in April from 7 to 9, it was still relatively cool, and at least at my house. I can't say for everybody. We didn't really run the AC when the sun was completely down, but during that 9 to 5 window, it was hot. Okay. But that's when the panels are still producing a lot, and it was considered off-peak. So April being a lot hotter than normal could have had your AC shut, maybe turn off more than it might have been on a normal April temperature.
It kind of messed with the thermostat. I don't know. Maybe you'll talk about that later. But you know, I put the 2 Nest thermostats in, and it was, at first I thought it was a wiring problem, but then I realized it must have been a load controller. So I just started ignoring it. It started going away. But I don't know. Can you integrate the thermostat into this conversation, or is that it?
I have Nest as well, and it'll say, like, you might get a notification that says, hey, your AC is offline or your thermostat's offline, right?
Exactly.
When it says it's offline, that just means that the load controller shut it down temporarily.
Okay. That's what I thought.
And it should come back online when the load controller sees that, okay, your 30-minute trajectory is not going to surpass your load peak demand, then it will allow the AC to come back on.
Got it. Okay. Yeah, that's what I thought. I stopped worrying about it because I thought I was stressing out. I said, it's not the thermostat. There's something else at play here. So.
Sure. Now on Nest or any type of programmable thermostat, you can program it to raise the temperature every day if you wanted to, starting at like 6 o'clock to 8 o'clock, and then at 8 o'clock go back down if you wanted to set it up like that, so that it does it by itself rather than the load controller doing it.
Okay, so just to correspond with the peak hours.
Yep. Now,
Okay.
when the sun is up, the load controller, unless you're just running everything in the home, when the sun's up and your panels are producing, the load controller shouldn't shut power to your AC or any appliance, because you're getting your power from the solar,
Right.
not drawing it from SRP.
No, it used to happen basically around 6:30 in the evening, something
Okay.
like that. It would, I guess, that's when it computed the power, whatever. So.
And you can
Gordon?
raise it in halves, right? So if I wanted this to be 5.5, like Edie just said, you know, they raise it to 5.5 versus 5, or 7.5 or 8. The higher the demand in July and August, that's the most expensive time. So those are the 2 months, June, July, August, September. Towards the end of the night is when you'd want to be more mindful of, if you're running the AC, try not to run as any other big appliance during that from 7 o'clock to 8 o'clock window.
So what does 7 represent there? It represents.
This number represents the peak demand measured in kilowatts.
Okay. All right. Okay, I see. Okay. The next.
So like, for example, in July, I know I'm going to have a peak demand of 7, and I know it's going to cost me 3 times 943, which is basically 28 bucks. And then another 4 kilowatts times this number here.
Yep.
So 70 plus 28. So I know in July and August, and probably June and September, I'm going to have a $98 charge at my house for the peak demand.
Okay.
And then all the kilowatt hours that I buy from SRP are going to be mostly at this 3.6 or 4 cent rate. So when I charge my car, we blast the AC up until like 4 o'clock so that we can raise the AC a little bit as the sun is starting to set. But of course, laundry. Now, the washer, and you can go to SRP's website too. They have a estimated calculator that you could actually go on and click on. Can you all see that where it says air conditioner, heat pump, etc.?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if my AC was on, there we go. So the AC says 4 kilowatts, and the dryer is 5.6. So the dryer has the biggest pull as far as demand would go. Or the oven is 3.4. So again, if you had a bunch of these things on, you can see how quickly your demand can get relatively high. Now the load controller has what's called current transformers on it. So it measures all of your electricity consumption in kind of some of them are specifically measured. So let's go back to the home page, the dashboard. So real quick, kind of back to your usage, you can see my on-peak usage so far this month has been 111, and my off-peak usage has been 984. My generation on-peak has been 150, and generation off-peak has been 288. And here's my cost projected on my next bill. This is my full month prediction. So this is a prediction of the demand system saying, okay, here's what we think you're going to use for the month based off of what you've used so far. And then the bottom one is just over a 72-hour window. So this 72-hour window one, I really don't pay a whole lot of attention to. And the estimated prediction, I don't really pay a lot of attention to either. I mainly just pay attention to like, what is my peak demand so far this month? And what's my cost so far for the demand and for the kilowatt hour usage? Now, this here is my total consumption so far. That's not what I bought from SRP. So I'm gonna actually share my bill just so you can kind of, because the SRP bill itself has a good amount of data on there too that will help.
They're always making estimates too, right? I mean,
On the actual bill, it'll be exact numbers to the kilowatt hour.
yeah, when the month's over, right? Yeah, okay.
Yeah, this is the actual bill when the month's over. So my bill cycle ended May 10th. And so my total kilowatt hours used from basically April 9th or April 10th to May 10th was 1,975. That's what I total used. On peak was 316, off peak was 1659. So that's good. My usage on peak was way less than off peak. That's what you want to see. But then here's the generation. So the bill will also show what you've generated. So I generated 130 on peak and generated 685 off peak. So my total was 815. So the total amount of electricity I bought from SRP is the next column, which is here. So basically this 1975 minus 815, this is the total that I bought from SRP. And I only used 186 from SRP on peak and 974 off peak. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Yep.
So what was your demand charge?
Then on the demand charge is here. So this on peak demand of 4.8. So up here on the bill itself, it'll say, so for my demand charge was
Okay.
$49.54. My on peak was really low. It was only $8, $8.50. My off peak was 35. Now 35 was for this 974. So real quick, 35 divided by 974 is basically 3.6 cents. So my average off peak this past month was 3.6 cents, when it's like it's supposed to be. And then of course, a small tax from the city of Gilbert and a state tax. So this is my total May bill. Now, I most likely use a lot more power just because my car is electric. So these numbers will be different for each home. So on the bill itself, once you actually get it, this is what you've used, this is what you generated, this is what you actually bought in kilowatt hours. Now you can see January to April, my demand was set at 4. Right? So my demand was 1.8, 3.2, 3.4, 2.8 because it was set at 4 those months because I'm not running the air conditioner. And then it's set at 5 for May, and so that's when it got up to 4.8.
And while you're on that screen, Jordan, pointing out that where it says less customer generation, that total kilowatt of 815 is only the energy that you exported to them. Your system generated a whole bunch more that you used that SRP never saw.
Well, this is total. This is the total generation.
It's just net billing, I think.
The generation that went back to SRP, or that came from your system?
This is the total generation from my system, this number here.
Okay, but isn't that the number that was subtracted from the total used, the metered energy 1160?
Right, so SRP tracks what you use both from the solar and from SRP.
Ah, okay.
They also track what your solar produces. SRP will.
Okay.
So this is total generation from my solar panels for that month. And for me, I'm probably using it. I'm not generating a bunch of credits because I'm using it right away. Now, for some of you during off peak in March and April, you might see a negative off peak charge in April and March, because April and March are the months where we use the least amount of power. and the off-peak hours are from 9 o'clock till 5 o'clock, which is when the panels are producing. So it's very possible to have a negative off-peak charge in the wintertime, because that's when your panels are producing, is during off-peak. Unless you use a ton of electricity at nighttime, like I do. Any questions on the bill itself, on what numbers to look for? So let me go back to the demand system.
Hey, Jordan, this is Vincent from Flow United Neighbors. I'm actually really curious about this placement of the meter in the entire electrical circuit, because it does seem different from a lot of other utilities that I see. What's the, not to get too far away from the topic, but what's the reason that it's counting all of the system's production and not just the energy that's sent out onto the grid?
So the meter they do add will measure, goes backwards if you send power back to them. The SRP is unique in the sense that they measure what you produce as a whole. So for example, APS in the West Valley, that bill, the APS bill, only shows what you sent back to them. Kind of what Peter was referring to is APS will not show what you produced. It only shows what you didn't use when you produced it. So SRP is pretty unique in that sense that they track, on the bill at least, what is being produced.
Was that tied to some production incentive at some point in time in the past, or it seems like a policy decision.
So in years past, I did do a full retail net credit. And even today, it's technically net metering, where if you produce an extra kilowatt hour, SRP will give you a credit for that kilowatt hour. They'll give you the credit whenever you generated it. So if you generate an extra credit at off-peak, when the power would have cost you 3.7 cents, that's the credit they'll give you. For this plan, there's another plan that has a credit of 2.8 cents a kilowatt hour, which is not as good. So none of you should be on that plan, because it gives a smaller credit for the kilowatt hours that you might not use right away. But the extra meter they install, Vincent, still will measure any power that's put back on the grid. But the bill itself will measure, at least show customers the total generation. And that should match up with your Solar Edge or the monitoring app. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, while we're still on this basic screen and the information here, it may not apply to everybody, but the question of having storage batteries, and if your batteries might also be used to capture some of that solar that you're generating during the off-peak, which you could then pull out during your on-peak time to do shaving, demand shaving. Can you just describe that briefly, that concept?
I had planned on talking about that. Is that okay if we save that to the end?
Oh, sure, please do.
Just to not jumble numbers and other things together.
Right.
But yeah, thanks for bringing that up. So back to the load controller, there's a bunch of other pages you can look at and go to. This is really the main one that I pay attention to the most. If you want to like kind of geek out and dive deep of what's using the most electricity or when are you using your electricity. So you can go to real time. So right now it's 450, right? My demand right now is -2. So, and I'm guessing either at least one, maybe both of my air conditioners are running at home right now. My demand is negative. So I'm producing more electricity in kilowatts than what I'm using. Now I've used 128 kilowatt hours so far, but my instantaneous demand right now is -2. So if you ever want to see either on the app or on the site, like, hey, what's my demand right now? Now, as the sun starts to set, if my usage didn't change at all, then as my solar stops producing, this number is going to change. But right now the sun is high in the sky, and so I don't have any, I can run both my air conditioners right now. If I wanted to run my dryer, I could, but it's probably not a good idea. And then you can kind of see over the last 72 hours where I had spikes in my pull from SRP. So that's kind of self-explanatory, just basically real time for every, and it updates every 60 seconds. As you can see, this clock is counting down what your real time demand is in kilowatts, and right now mine's negative. Now my panels face straight west. This one here just kind of shows a breakdown of, so my downstairs AC, so everything else is kind of jumbled together, and my upstairs AC, as far as how much power are they using. So my downstairs AC unit uses 40% of my power. My upstairs is less. And then everything else is roughly 40% too. So my downstairs AC unit is what's using the most electricity as a whole. And then again, these are just big spikes of your energy consumption. If you want to look over the last, this will always be over a 3-day window, over a 72-hour window. Now you can see here too, like my demand, this is at basically 11 o'clock at night, was 13 kilowatts, 13 plus. But that's when I was charging my car. This was May 16th. And I didn't have to charge it much over the weekend. And so this is so far last night, right? What's today? Yeah, so basically this is during the evening of earlier today. And then this is during off-peak time only. So this big spike in electricity is not a big deal. I don't really use this page much, but that's what it will tell you is when you're having your biggest spikes and what's using the most electricity. Oh, sorry, now this is during on-peak. So if I go to off-peak, now it's everything else. The other is lights and the dishwasher, and everything else is jumbled together. My AC unit during off-peak, downstairs, AC unit upstairs, and everything else. And then my range was used a little bit. Or you can do a combined. So if you want to know just between on-peak and off-peak, what's using the most electricity, same thing.
Jordan?
Yep.
I see you have one of those sensors unused. You could, if you wanted, go back and monitor the EV charging network, couldn't you?
By itself, I could, yeah. The EV is just jumbled in with this other, which is why there's such a big spike in the green.
But you can't control it. You can't turn it off, but you could at least be monitoring it if you wanted to be watching that.
Correct.
Okay.
Yep.
So you got no gasoline bill. That's good.
I do have a gas bill.
Oh, you do? No, I mean for your car.
Oh, yeah, not for my car.
Yeah.
So the solar, this is only measured over a 72-hour window as well. And this says solar distribution. So for the last 72 hours, I've generated 95 kilowatt hours and I've consumed 233. So how much of that came from SRP? Well, 233 minus 95 would be how much I consumed from SRP. And then this graph here shows, okay, solar consumed during off-peak has been 68 kilowatt hours of the 95. Solar to the grid, so basically during on-peak hours, for the last 3 days, I've sent 3 kilowatt hours to SRP, which is good because that's a really low number. I don't want to be sending power to SRP from my solar. I want to use it and then buy it from them during off-peak. Solar to the grid off-peak is 9.5, and that's just because I don't use much power before on-peak hours starts. And part of this was solar, oh, just because the panels start producing before 2 o'clock, right? And then solar consumed during on peak is 13 kilowatt hours, or 13.8 out of the 95. And solar consumed during off peak is 68. This graph here shows usage from solar during on peak is 64%, which you want that number to be higher than this number. Usage from solar off peak, I want that to be low and that one to be high. That's good. I'd rather use it during on peak from the solar than use it off peak, but either way is fine. I don't really pay too much attention when I'm using my power, except for between that 7 to 8 window when the sun's going down and the solar is not producing.
So you're programming your thermostat to, so both air conditioners aren't running at the same time between 7 and 8 or something like that, or?
So my ACs are both, like my thermostats, I have more than one. They're programmed to soon, like around 7 o'clock to raise the temperature to about 80.
I see.
For that 1 hour.
Okay.
Then as soon as 8:01 hits, my thermostats are programmed to drop the temperature back down.
Got it.
To about 77 or 76, whatever's comfortable for us at that time. But up until, you can see here, the UV ray index, for, you know, the sun was out till 1800, which is 6 o'clock, right? So the solar is going to keep producing all the way up until, well, there we go. Let me get come on. I want the blue to be out.
If you rest your cursor on the...
There we go. Okay. So this is the solar production, this blue graph here. And it looks like it generated all the way up until about 6:30-ish for the last few days. And this is real time right now. Come on, there we go. But I don't spend a lot of time on this screen because it's not too concerning to me when I'm using my power, whether it's on peak or off peak. The biggest variable out of all of them, of all the numbers, is the demand. That's the only thing that could potentially have a higher charge. All the electricity is super cheap. And then in events, it'll tell you when something was shut off or activity here on the side. But as far as when I log in, the only page I really look at most is this month to date, what I've used and what my costs will be and what my demand is, just to make sure it's still under the set rate that I want it to be under in my demand profile.
Jordan, when these were set up, they're just they're preset. You instructed Energy to set them at a certain level as we get into the summer months, and then the back off. And is that how it worked, or?
Yeah, they have like basically a preset, and then you can log in and change it to whatever you want it to be set it at. So
okay.
Go to devices, click on your name, and then go to the demand profile, and you can change what your demand is set at for every single month.
Okay. Okay.
They'll look very similar to what I have set up here.
Okay.